Thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you to the translators, because then I could follow a little bit throughout the day. I understand there was an interesting debate now on stage, and HTA was mentioned a few times. So hopefully I can provide at least some perspective of what's happening at the European level, Brussels level, let's say, that might impact you, or that will impact Greece at some point. Yeah, maybe it can support the reflection. My colleagues at SFE asked EFPIA to be present here to really provide this more Brussels perspective to your national discussions and your national debate. So I'm from EFPIA, as was just mentioned, and I saw from the previous speakers there were quite a few references to EFPIA and the work we do, so it's quite nice to see slides and our logo appear, and the We Want Rest campaign that is translated into Greek. So just, you probably know, but EFPIA is basically the European sphere, so the representative trade organization of the pharmaceutical industry at European level, and therefore we're very active at the Brussels level, working with the European institutions. And we represent indirectly, therefore, also countries, member states, and industry active in member states, and sphere for Greece. So what I wanted to touch upon today is reflecting a little bit on HTA. You asked me to discuss what's the practice today across Europe, what are countries doing as Greece is currently setting up its own system. So looking a little bit at what experiences there are across Europe, and to address a little bit what's happening at a pan-European level, so in terms of collaboration across countries, and then a few thoughts on how this will impact Greece. So just to start with, in terms of what is HTA, let's say, and how it's used by other countries today. I mean, you certainly know this definition, but I just thought it's good to have it again on screen. And what are we talking about when we mention HTA, and what we are not talking about when we mention HTA? So this is the definition that is used by UNETA, which is this European collaboration, has been going on for a few years already. And I put in bold just a few points which I thought are most relevant. So basically, in a nutshell, what it is, it's really a support to decision-making. That's what HTA is about. It's a scientific tool that is supposed to help a decision-maker to provide them with scientific evidence to support their decisions. So what I'm trying to get to is that it doesn't replace the decision-making. It's not an automatic mechanism that would take a decision for someone, but it's really there as a supporting tool, and it's a scientific method to combine evidence from multiple sources. So you see medical, social, economic, and ethical issues that can inform the decision of a decision maker. And therefore, what I wanted to say also in relation to this definition, it's not supposed to be a cost containment tool. It's really supposed to be support to decision-making and a scientific support. This is another way to illustrate this fact, what I wanted to say about support to decision-making and evidence-based decision-making. So you see on this chart, which I borrowed from a colleague, it tries to match the regulatory process with HTA processes. So the top of the chart is what the regulatory agency looks at along the life cycle of development of a medicine. And at the bottom, you see the HTA steps. So you really see that it's about generating data on the effects of medicines. So obviously I'm talking about medicines coming from EFPIA. It's about generating data and analyzing this data at different points in the life cycle of products. So you see how it matches the regulatory way of generating data, and that these are related but quite different types of information that are important and necessary to conduct HTA. So you see at the bottom the reference to relative clinical effectiveness. So how does the product work? I mean, it's the same things that were in the definition: ethical, legal, social impact, and cost, economic aspects. In terms of experience across Europe today, so here I took a graph that is included in a report that UNETA published recently, last year, where they did a comparative analysis, let's say, of all the systems across Europe of HTA and how this HTA is used in pricing and reimbursement decision-making across countries. So what this graph shows is just where there is HTA and what segment of health technologies it applies to. So the blue is where HTA is used for pharmaceuticals only. The yellow is where it's used for both pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceuticals. And the red, Grace, is where there is no HTA. So you're the one that standing out. What is from last year again. But, I mean, this shows, okay, HTA is basically used a little bit everywhere to support pricing and reimbursement decisions, but actually when you look a little bit more into the details of how it's done and when it's done in the process of decision-making, and so how it supports the pricing and reimbursement decisions, it's very different. So here it comes from a report that we commissioned at EFPIA. It was conducted by a consultant called CRA, Charles Rivers Associates. And they looked into the processes and what type of evidence is used in the HTA process for the purpose of pricing and reimbursement. So we're really looking at for the purpose of pricing and reimbursement. So here you see with some time points, like on top of the slide, you see some of the decision-making points in terms of regulatory decisions. So you see how the HTA process, when it starts, how long it takes to prepare the submission, when it's submitted, and what type of evaluation is conducted. Is it just a clinical evaluation? Like, for example, if you consider, here on the slide you see Spain and Germany are listed as doing only a relative effectiveness appraisal to support their pricing and reimbursement. Or whether they do both the clinical evaluation as well as economic appraisal. So basically all the other countries. But you see, therefore, there are differences in terms of the scope of what is being evaluated, clinical evidence only or clinical and economic. And also in terms of timing, when does this HTA take place and when is a report available, and therefore when does it when can it be used to support the pricing and reimbursement decision? This other slide is just more countries to reflect diversity across Europe. And this was just to show, to go more into one specific example. So it's the French way of doing HTA to support pricing and reimbursement. And I thought it's interesting just because it shows, again, how the scientific evidence-based tool, which is HTA, is really about generating evidence on various aspects, and how this then feeds into a decision which is based on this evidence, but at the end of the day, it's a decision on which level of reimbursement, or whether you will reimburse a product, first of all, and then at what price you can reimburse the product given the specific country, given the budget available, given the alternatives that are available on the market. This is a different question, let's say. The first thing is the HTA is to assess what this product brings to patients, and then can I afford it? That's a second step. And these are clearly separated if you look also at this French example. So, moving on to European reflections, I think what I was trying to show with this overview of a few characteristics of country experiences is that they are quite different. The way that HTA is done is quite different across European countries. However, more or less all countries do it, and they all do some things, similar things. And that's why, at some point in history, some time ago, the European Commission initiated, asked member states to get together and to work together on this topic of HTA, on this scientific generation of evidence to support decision-making, to support pricing and reimbursement. So since 2006, we have this UNETA, so-called UNETA, European Network on HTA, and you see that it's gone through various phases of this project, and we are now on the Joint Action 3 UNETA, where they are trying to build on their history and on all the work that they have done in the past to really become operational in terms of what can member states, what can countries do together at the European level that would then support the national discussions and the national decisions. And we're at a stage in this European discussion and European collaboration, which is quite advanced, because building on this UNETA cooperation, the Commission has very recently, in January this year, issued a proposal for legislation, for a regulation that would establish a system of, as you see here on the slide, member state-driven joint work. So there is a proposal coming from the Commission to establish a framework with a member state committee that would conduct joint clinical assessments, that will do joint scientific consultations, and where they would also, they will also do horizon scanning jointly, and they could also, if they so wished, do collaborate on other areas of HTA, so beyond the clinical areas of HTA, but that would be voluntary coordination. It wouldn't be part of the core of the work. The core of the work would be really to do jointly clinical assessments and jointly scientific consultations. So if you look back at what type of HTA you see across member states today, and the fact that some are really focusing their evidence-based decision-making on clinical information and others do clinical and economic, the proposal is that this clinical evaluation is done at the European level, basically, rather than doing it individually in each member state. This is just a proposal from the Commission. It has to go through a long debate and a long legislative process across, at the Brussels level, and the Greek government will certainly be involved in this discussion. So the implication of this proposal, if it's going through, it's, as I said, there would be one single joint clinical assessment conducted by a committee of member states at the European level, and there would be, therefore, a report on this clinical assessment, and it would be mandatory for member states to use this in their decision-making. And there would be, therefore, one common procedural framework and one set of rules for clinical assessment. So one set of methodologies, basically, of how do you do clinical assessment as part of an HTA. This is, as I said, it's just the beginning of a long process. This is just a slide showing that the proposal is from January 2018, but there are various steps foreseen in this proposal it wouldn't be to be implemented straight away, but there would be some transition period, meaning that there wouldn't be anything mandatory on member states before a few years. And at the earliest, 2023, I think, is the date that the Commission is looking at, if everything runs smoothly, when those willing member states could collaborate on joint clinical assessments as part of this framework. So, because of the lengthy legislative process, it wouldn't be before 2023. I heard the joke about how Greece was slow because it wasn't ready before the end of summer, this HTA committee, but you see that at the Brussels level it's very slow as well. So what would it be based on? If they were doing these joint clinical assessments, it would be based on what UNETA has been doing so far. So this is the the way that procedurally the UNETA collaboration today conducts joint clinical assessments, because they already do it. So I'm not going to go through this slide, but basically you can see that it's in parallel to the EMA process. There is a submission of evidence from the manufacturer to the group of member states within UNETA, and this group of member states within UNETA analyzes the evidence provided, and they conclude in a report on what they consider the product brings in addition to a set of comparators that has been agreed upon. And this information is then supposed to be useful for, you know, the discussion at the national level. Then now I know what I have in front of me, and now the national discussion is supposed to be, can I afford it, and at what price can I afford it? So this is, again, some reference to UNETA and what they have been working on. I mean, guidelines and methods are already available because they have worked on it for the past 10 years. So for this future model, when it comes into place, the methods would already be there. And this is a reference to 3 assessments that have been recently conducted as part of the UNETA collaboration. So you can see it's just some details of what actually it means when we say a joint clinical assessment report. So you see the 3 products that here were evaluated in the framework of UNETA, where you have the indication is listed, the patient population, which comparators were considered, and you see that there is not one single comparator, but in some cases there are more than one. And you see that in terms of the conclusions, there are conclusions on what is the efficacy of the products compared to the comparators, and what is the safety profile. So what does it mean for Greece? I don't know the Greek situation very well. I don't know the Greek market, but I'm involved at this European level, and always trying with colleagues from national associations to understand whether and how the European debate can be useful for national decision making, because that's the ultimate goal. Otherwise, it's kind of useless what Brussels does. Obviously, I mean, you're in the middle of setting up this HTA system, and this doesn't, as far as I understand, it comes from actually the Commission and others in the memorandum that they have asked you to set up HTA. So I think in terms of, from a European perspective, and with the background of the UNETA work and the experiences across European countries, what's important to keep in mind when you establish an HTA system is really to follow these good practices that are internationally recognized as, this is what you should consider when you set up a system. This doesn't come from the industry, although we have taken them on board, I would say, as an industry that they make sense. It comes from a publication from health economists, so Drummond and et al. From a while ago. But I think they remain relevant, and I'm sure that the ministry, when they have developed the system that will soon be put in place, have considered it. You see, these are 15 principles, and I would say that you can divide them in 3 areas, which are about methods, and process, and linked to decision-making. In terms of method, which I have highlighted here, those that I consider are related to methods, I wanted just to make the link again to the UNETA or to the collaboration at the European level, and the link to what I understand Greece is working towards. So my colleagues in SFE kindly shared with me some information on where, what type of system is going to be set up. So I understand that this evaluation procedure is supposed to look at these different dimensions. So clinical benefit, comparison against any reimbursable treatments already available, level of credibility of the findings, cost effectiveness, budget impact. So if you look at what UNETA has been doing and what is in the current HTA draft regulation from the Commission, you see very very clear similarities. So basically what would be great is if Greece is setting up their system so that they can refer to what the European collaboration will be producing at some point, so that there is no duplication between what Greece would potentially do as part of a collaboration at the European level and what happens in the Greek market. Obviously, the European work is not going to cover all the levels, all the dimensions that you would want to incorporate, and some work will continue to be needed at the Greek level. But maybe that's where Greece needs to focus is, I guess, scarce resources, is really on those aspects that are not looked at the European level, rather than duplicating what is going to be already done together with Greece at the European level. My time's up. There are these governance principles that are included in this list of 15. I think from an industry perspective, it's obviously, because it's a tool to support decisions, it goes without saying, but unbiased and transparent is one of the key elements. So whatever committee is being set up needs to be really about generating and assessing evidence independently from the decision that should be taken by someone else, basically. And this link to decision-making again, so it has to be separate, but it has to be clear as well that there is a link. I mean, in terms of EFPIA, we really support and defend this concept of outcome-based pricing, let's say, so that meaning that with the HTA, you should be able to determine, again, what's the value of the product. Is it valuable or is it not valuable? I mean, arguably, normally, if it has received marketing authorization, it should at least work. But is it valuable in terms of what does it bring in addition to what is already available on the market? But this link to decision-making, then, how do you translate that into a price and what level of price? This is different, but there should be a clear link as to how this bridge is made between the evidence generation and the decision-making. So with that, I wish Greece good luck in setting up the HTA system. I think we know from those established systems in like the UK, Germany, or France, they have been there for a long time, and they're very complex, and it might not be the right model for Greece to set up here. But probably you will have the chance that the European Union is already stepping into that area and will produce something at the European level that you can use nationally rather than reinventing everything at the Greek level and spend too much effort on this at the Greek level. So I will look forward to listening to the rest of the debate today. Thank you.